The flowers are wilting, the caterer never showed up, and your sister-in-law just locked herself in the bathroom crying," my assistant Jessica whispered urgently into my phone. I could hear the chaos of 200 wedding guests in the background, their confused murmur growing louder by the minute. Before we embark on this incredible journey together, I have a small, heartfelt request. Please subscribe to my channel, give this video a like. It costs you nothing but means the world to me. And let me know in the comments which beautiful corner of the world you're watching from. Your support truly makes a difference. My name is Pearl Mitchell. I'm 47 years old, and I've been running Mitchell Events, my boutique wedding planning company in Saratoga Springs, New York, for the past 12 years. What you just heard was the sound of my sister-in-law Rebecca's first and last attempt at proving she could do better than me. It all started 6 months earlier at my nephew's graduation party. Rebecca had been particularly vocal that evening, wine glass in hand, gesturing dramatically at the perfectly coordinated centerpieces I'd created for the occasion. "Anyone can throw some flowers in a vase and call it event planning," she'd announced to the assembled family. "I mean, really, Pearl, I could do this in my sleep. I have an eye for design that you do your best." The family had fallen into that uncomfortable silence that follows when someone crosses a line they don't even recognize exists. My brother Michael had shot his wife a warning look, but Rebecca was just getting started. "I'm not trying to be mean," she'd continued, though her tone suggested otherwise, "but I've been watching your little business for years, and honestly, I could do better, much better. I have connections you don't have, taste you could learn from, and let's face it, I understand what wealthy clients actually want." I'd set down my own wine glass carefully, looked her directly in the eye, and said something that would change everything. "You know what, Rebecca? You're absolutely right. You should try." The room had gone dead quiet. Rebecca's face had shifted from smug satisfaction to confusion, then to something that looked almost like fear. Because in that moment, I think she realized that I wasn't going to argue with her, defend myself, or get upset. I was going to let her prove it. Now, 6 months later, as I sat in my car outside the Sagamore Resort, listening to the sounds of her spectacular failure through my phone, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of vindication and sadness. This wasn't how I'd wanted it to go, but sometimes people need to learn their lessons the hard way. The bride was crying, the groom's family was demanding answers, and Rebecca, who had been so confident she could do better, had just discovered that confidence and competence are two very different things. The real trouble with Rebecca had been building for years, like water damage behind a wall that you don't notice until the ceiling caves in. She'd married my brother Michael when I was just starting my business, fresh out of my divorce and determined to build something of my own. While I was working 18-hour days, learning every aspect of event planning from vendor relations to crisis management, Rebecca was establishing herself as the family's unofficial critic in residence. "Pearl's doing events now," she'd tell people at family gatherings, with that particular inflection that made it sound like I was selling vacuum cleaners door to door. "It's sweet that she's trying to be creative." The comments escalated over the years. When I landed the Morrison Wells wedding, a $150,000 affair that got featured in Hudson Valley Weddings magazine, Rebecca informed everyone that the flowers were adequate and the venue choice predictable. When I started getting booked 18 months in advance, she mentioned how some people just had lower standards these days. My breaking point came that night at Tommy's graduation party. I'd spent 3 days coordinating everything for my nephew's celebration, arranging for his favorite barbecue caterer, designing centerpieces that incorporated his baseball achievements, even hiring a DJ who specialized in music that would appeal to both teenagers and grandparents. Everything had gone perfectly. Until Rebecca's performance. "I mean, it's fine for a backyard party," she'd said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "But if this were a real event, something that mattered, well, I'd handle it completely differently. I know people, real people, important people." My mother had tried to change the subject, but Rebecca was on a roll. "I planned my own wedding, 400 guests, and it was flawless. absolutely flawless. I have a vision that just comes naturally to me." I remembered her wedding. Michael had confided in me afterward about the vendor disasters, the timeline confusion, and the fact that they'd gone $30,000 over budget because Rebecca kept changing her mind about everything. But pointing that out would have just created more family drama. Instead, I'd made my offer. "Rebecca, I've been thinking about expanding the business. If you're serious about this, I have a client who's looking for someone with your particular aesthetic sense. The Rothschild Chen wedding, October 15th, 200 guests, $200,000 budget." The room had gone silent again, but this time it was different. Everyone was looking at Rebecca, waiting to see if she'd put her money where her mouth was. Well, of course I could handle that," she'd said, but I caught the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "When would I start?" "Tomorrow, if you want. I'll introduce you to Priscilla Rothschild. She's very particular about what she wants." That last part wasn't a lie. Priscilla Rothschild was notorious in the wedding planning community for her exacting standards and her tendency to fire vendors who disappointed her. I'd worked with her mother-in-law twice before and knew exactly what this family expected. Rebecca had lifted her chin, that familiar defiant gesture. Perfect. It's time someone showed these people what a real event looks like. The trap was set, though I told myself it wasn't really a trap. It was an opportunity for Rebecca to prove herself right. The next morning, Rebecca called me at 7 a.m., which should have been my first warning that she was in over her head. "So, about this wedding," she said without preamble, "what exactly does particular mean?" I was already at my office, reviewing vendor contracts for 3 different September weddings. "Priscilla likes things done a specific way. She's very detail-oriented." "Right, but how detail-oriented?" I pulled up Priscilla's file on my computer, scanning through 2 pages of single-spaced notes from our preliminary meeting. "She wants peonies, but only Sarah Bernhardt variety, and they have to be cut the morning of the wedding. The linens need to be ivory, not white, and the gold accents have to be 14 karat, not plated. She's particular about timing. Cocktail hour starts at exactly 5:17 p.m. because that's when she and David had their first kiss." Silence on the other end of the line. "Rebecca? That's very specific." "That's why she pays well. Look, if you don't think you can handle it—" "Of course I can handle it." The defensiveness was immediate and sharp. "I just want to make sure I understand her vision. When do I meet her?" We set up the meeting for that afternoon at Priscilla's family estate in Loudonville. I'd offered to come along for the introduction, but Rebecca had declined. "I work better when I can establish my own rapport with clients," she'd said. "I don't want her to think I'm just your assistant or something." Fair enough. I gave her Priscilla's address, her phone number, and one final piece of advice. Listen more than you talk. Priscilla knows what she wants. That evening, Rebecca called again. This time she sounded different, excited, almost giddy. "Pearl, you were right about her being particular, but my God, the budget she's working with. She wants ice sculptures, a 12-piece orchestra, and she's flying in flowers from 3 different countries. This is exactly the kind of sophisticated client I've been waiting for." "How did the meeting go?" "Perfectly. We connected immediately. She loved my ideas about the color palette, and when I suggested adding some dramatic lighting elements she hadn't even considered, she was thrilled. This is going to be the wedding of the century." Something cold settled in my stomach. In 12 years of working with high-end clients, I'd learned to recognize the warning signs. Priscilla Rothschild wasn't the type to get thrilled about suggestions from someone she'd just met. She was polite, reserved, and methodical in her decision-making. "What kind of lighting elements?" I asked carefully. "Oh, I don't want to spoil the surprise. Let's just say it's going to be much more dramatic than anything you've ever done." Priscilla said she'd never worked with someone who really understood her vision before. Now I was certain something was wrong. Priscilla was many things, but effusive wasn't one of them, and she definitely wouldn't criticize my work to a new planner, especially not in a first meeting. "Rebecca, just to be clear, you did tell her that I recommended you, right? And that this is your first professional event?" "Well, I may have, positioned my experience a little differently. I mean, I have planned events. My wedding, several dinner parties, that charity luncheon for the hospital auxiliary. Experience is experience, right? Wrong. Very, very wrong. But I didn't say that. Instead, I wished her luck and hung up the phone, already knowing how this story was going to end. 3 weeks into Rebecca's Wedding of the Sea injury, the first cracks started showing. I was having lunch with my florist, Carmen Rodriguez, when she dropped the bomb. Your sister-in-law called this morning about the Rothschild wedding. She wants to change the entire flower order 3 weeks before the event. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. Change it how? She wants to add birds of paradise and purple orchids to the arrangements. Says the peonies are too predictable, and she's going for tropical sophistication now. Carmen shook her head. Pearl, I've been doing this for 20 years. You can't just swap out Sarah Bernhardt peonies for tropical flowers and call it sophisticated. It's going to look like a hotel lobby in Cancun. That afternoon, I got a call from my preferred caterer, James Sullivan. I hate to bother you about this, but your referral for the Rothschild wedding is asking for some unusual changes. Such as? She wants to replace the seated dinner with interactive food stations and add a sushi bar. The family specifically requested traditional French cuisine, remember? 5 courses, wine pairings, the whole thing. Now she's talking about having guests walk around with plates like it's a networking event. By 5 o'clock, my phone had rung 6 more times. The string quartet had been replaced with a DJ who specialized in high-energy wedding receptions. The elegant seated ceremony had been moved to accommodate a grand entrance involving smoke machines. The carefully planned timeline had been thrown out entirely in favor of letting the celebration flow naturally. Each vendor who called sounded increasingly concerned, but they all ended with the same question. Should we proceed with these changes or wait to hear from you? I found myself in an impossible position. Rebecca had made it clear she didn't want my interference, and I'd promised to let her handle the event independently. But Priscilla Rothschild wasn't just any client. She was the daughter-in-law of Eleanor Rothschild, who sat on the boards of half the cultural institutions in the Hudson Valley. If this wedding was a disaster, my reputation would be collateral damage. That evening, I decided to call Priscilla directly. Mrs. Rothschild, this is Pearl Mitchell. I wanted to check in about how things are going with Rebecca. The pause that followed was long enough to make me uncomfortable. Pearl, I'm so glad you called. I've been meaning to reach out to you about the direction things have taken. Oh? Your colleague is certainly creative, but I'm concerned that we may be losing sight of the original vision. The changes she's proposing are quite dramatic, and frankly, not at all what David and I discussed. My heart sank. What kind of changes? Well, for starters, she suggested we have the ceremony at sunset instead of 4 o'clock, which would require moving the entire reception timeline. She wants to add a fog machine for my entrance, and she's insisting that the dinner needs to be more interactive, whatever that means. I closed my eyes, imagining Eleanor Rothschild's reaction to her daughter-in-law emerging from a cloud of artificial fog while guests wandered around with plates of sushi. Mrs. Rothschild, I need to ask you something directly. Are you happy with how this is progressing? Another long pause. Pearl, I hired your company because of your reputation for elegance and attention to detail. This feels like, well, like something completely different. But Rebecca seemed so confident, and she assured me that these changes would make the wedding unforgettable. Unforgettable was definitely one word for it. 2 weeks before the wedding, Rebecca's confidence finally cracked. I was at my office on a Thursday morning when she burst through the door without knocking, her usually perfect hair disheveled and her face flushed with panic. Pearl, I need help. This wedding it's bigger than I thought. I looked up from the vendor contracts I was reviewing for a November event. What's wrong? Everything. The florist is saying the tropical flowers won't work with the venue's lighting. The caterer is threatening to quit because I keep changing the menu. And Priscilla called yesterday asking why her dress-fitting appointment was canceled. You canceled her dress-fitting appointment? I didn't cancel it. I thought we might need that time slot for something else, so I moved it. But now the seamstress says she's booked solid until after the wedding date, and Priscilla is having some kind of breakdown about her dress not fitting properly. I set down my pen and really looked at my sister-in-law for the first time in years. Beneath the makeup and the designer clothes, she looked exhausted and overwhelmed. Despite everything, I felt a pang of sympathy. Rebecca, what exactly have you been telling these vendors? I've been trying to upgrade everything. The original plan was so safe, boring. I wanted to give them something spectacular, something that would really wow people. But did you check with Priscilla before making these changes? Rebecca's face flushed deeper. I tried to, but she kept asking all these questions about logistics and timing and vendor contracts. I thought it would be better to just handle the details myself and surprise her with the results. There it was. Rebecca had been making major changes to a $200,000 wedding without client approval, assuming that good intentions were more important than communication. "Show me what you've done," I said, gesturing to my computer. "Let's look at the current plan." What followed was 45 minutes of growing horror as Rebecca walked me through her improvements. The timeline was completely unrealistic. She'd scheduled the ceremony, cocktail hour, and dinner to overlap in physically impossible ways. She'd booked vendors who'd never worked together and whose styles directly conflicted. Worst of all, she'd promised elements that didn't exist in her budget, or, in some cases, in reality. "Rebecca, you've scheduled the string quartet and the DJ to perform at the same time in the same space. I thought they could collaborate, create something new and exciting. And this fog machine entrance, did you check with the venue about their fire safety requirements?" Fire safety requirements? I pulled up the Sagamore Resort's vendor guidelines and showed her the relevant section. No pyrotechnics, smoke machines, or open flames without prior approval and safety inspection. This would require permits, insurance adjustments, and at least a month of advance notice. Rebecca stared at the screen, her face going pale. "But I already told Priscilla it was all arranged." "What else did you tell her was arranged?" The list was staggering. Rebecca had promised a 12-piece orchestra she couldn't afford, flowers that weren't available in October, a menu that would require kitchen equipment the venue didn't have, and a photography package that included helicopters and horses. "Rebecca," I said as gently as I could, "you need to call Priscilla right now and explain what's happened." "I can't do that. She'll fire me. She'll tell everyone I'm incompetent." "If you don't tell her now, you'll have 200 angry guests and a bride having a nervous breakdown in 2 weeks. That's going to be a lot worse for everyone involved." Rebecca sank into the chair across from my desk, finally grasping the magnitude of what she'd created. "Will you help me fix this?" I looked at her for a long moment, thinking about all the years of criticism, all the snide comments about my adequate work and predictable choices. Part of me wanted to let her face the consequences alone, but that wasn't who I was, and it wasn't the kind of person I wanted to be. Saving Rebecca's disaster required every favor I'd built up in 12 years of business, plus a few small miracles. The first miracle was Priscilla Rothschild's grace under pressure. When I called to explain the situation, she listened without interrupting, asked a few pointed questions, and then said, "Can you fix this, Pearl?" "I can try, but it's going to require some compromises." I figured as much. At this point, I just want my wedding to happen without anyone getting hurt or humiliated. The second miracle was my vendor network. Carmen agreed to rush order white and ivory flowers to replace the tropical disaster. James Sullivan worked overtime to revise the catering plan back to something resembling the original vision. The string quartet graciously pretended they'd never been canceled in favor of DJ Lightning Rod. Rebecca, to her credit, called every vendor personally to apologize for the confusion. I watched her make those calls from my office, and for the first time in years, I saw genuine humility in her voice. "I'm sorry," she said to each one. "I got excited about the possibilities and lost sight of what was actually important. Pearl is going to handle the final coordination." The wedding itself was beautiful, though not without complications. The flowers arrived 3 hours late, the cake nearly didn't fit through the venue's service entrance, and we had to restructure the entire timeline on the fly when the photographer's assistant got food poisoning. But Priscilla got her elegant, traditional wedding. The peonies were perfect. The French cuisine was flawless. The string quartet played beautifully as she walked down the aisle at exactly 4 p.m., no fog machine in sight. Rebecca stayed in the background during the actual event, helping where she could, but letting me handle the client interaction. I watched her observing everything: how I communicated with vendors, how I handled the last-minute crises, how I kept the family informed without panicking them. After the reception ended and the last guest had departed, Rebecca found me in the venue's bridal suite, where I was packing up the emergency kit I always brought to weddings. "Pearl, I owe you an apology, a real one." I looked up from organizing my backup bobby pins and safety pins. "Okay. I've been awful to you. For years. I convinced myself that what you do isn't that complicated, that anyone could do it if they just had good taste and the right connections. I had no idea." She sat down on the small sofa, still in her event coordination outfit, but looking deflated. "I've been thinking about it all evening, watching you work. You handled that flower crisis like it was nothing. When the timeline fell apart, you just fixed it, and everyone trusted you completely." "It comes with experience," I said carefully. "No, it's more than that. It's respect. Real respect. The vendors trust you because you've proven yourself reliable. The clients trust you because you listen to what they actually want, not what you think they should want. The family trusts you because you care about getting it right more than you care about looking impressive." I zipped up my kit and sat down across from her. "What are you going to tell people about tonight?" Rebecca was quiet for a moment. "The truth. That I thought I could do something I'd never actually learned how to do, and I nearly ruined someone's wedding because of my pride, and that my sister-in-law saved the day because she actually knows what she's doing." It wasn't the dramatic confrontation I might have imagined. There were no tears, no grand gestures of reconciliation, just an honest acknowledgement of what had happened and why. "Rebecca," I said, standing to leave, "if you're serious about learning this business, I know some coordinators who offer training programs, real ones." She nodded. "I'd like that. But Pearl, I think I'll stick to being a client for a while. I want to plan my anniversary party next year, and I'd like to hire you to do it properly." I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd shared with my sister-in-law in years. "I'd be happy to help you with that." 6 months later, Rebecca's anniversary party was featured in Albany Lifestyle magazine, not because it was the most expensive or elaborate event of the year, but because it was perfectly executed, elegant, personal, and exactly what she and Michael had envisioned. Rebecca had hired me to plan it, but she'd also enrolled in a professional event planning certification program at Hudson Valley Community College. "I want to understand what you actually do," she told me when she signed up for the classes. "Not so I can compete with you, but so I can appreciate what goes into making something look effortless." Our family relationships had settled into something more honest and more comfortable. Rebecca still had opinions about everything. That was just who she was. But now she expressed them differently. Instead of dismissive criticism, she asked questions. Instead of assuming she knew better, she admitted when she didn't understand something. The wedding industry is small, especially in our region, and word had gotten around about what happened with the Rothschild wedding. But instead of damaging my reputation, it seemed to enhance it. Other planners respected how I'd handled the crisis. Clients appreciated that I'd put the bride's happiness above my own ego. Rebecca's spectacular near disaster had taught both of us important lessons. She'd learned that confidence without competence is just noise. I'd learned that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is let them face the consequences of their choices, and then help them learn from those consequences. These days, when someone tells me they could do my job better, I just smile and say, "You know what? You should try." But now I make sure they understand what they're signing up for first. Because the thing about saying you can do better is that eventually someone might just give you the chance to prove it. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. And remember, respect is earned through action, not assumption. Until next time, keep your boundaries strong and your standards higher.